also it helps Phil in that you don't have to always bring pressure, meaning bring a linebacker, which we did some of that today plenty, don't get me wrong, but we can be even more disruptive, and we don't always have to bring pressure in order to do it. So we've got some guys that can rush the passer. We have more, I've been saying it all along. We've got depth and athleticism up front, and we made it really tough. I mean, there was that one series where they were coming out of our tunnel over here, and they just continued to go backwards. It was holding penalty after holding penalty after holding penalty, which, I mean, that's a great confidence boost when you're standing on the sideline and you realize that they can't block you. And
all right, welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. And yesterday's game went exactly as we said it was going to go, right? So South Carolina ends up coming out of their SEC opener, a road trip to Kentucky with a 31-6 win. I believe that was the first SEC opener that South Carolina's won since 2017. There's a lot of kind of first and standout, I guess, statistics for this one that we'll get throughout this one. But I think we have to start with where Shane Beamer started right there. There was a moment where I was texting my dad and my father-in-law, who were both watching the game at the same time, and happily texting me. And I think it was pretty much the same moment that Beamer was talking about, where Kentucky took over around the 12-yard line and then got 2 or 3 straight holding penalties. And they had to hold because otherwise Kyle Kennard or Dylan Stewart was about to eat Brock Vandergriff for breakfast. And I sent the same text back. Basically, it was like, they just can't block South Carolina's front right now. And like Beamer said, that's kind of a good feeling when you already have a little bit of a lead there, and feels like you're shutting the door. Obviously, you know, being around South Carolina for a long time, you still have this sense of pessimism built in, but I don't know, there was a little bit of brightness starting to creep in whenever you started to see that over the course of the game. And I did get the feeling of I really don't know how Kentucky's going to put together 2 drives at this point and get back into it. What did you see yesterday in Kentucky and the South Carolina defense?
Yeah, I think you said it right there. You're always, I mean, in football period, not even just this game, as long as the game's within 1 score, you're still at the mercy of a tip ball, a referee's call, a weird play, something crazy happening, right? But as soon as South Carolina got that thing to a 2-possession game, Palmetto Floor and Gallery feeling better this week. Yeah, I think that summarizes the fan base pretty well. As soon as you go up 2 scores there, you score the touchdown and make it 17-6 late in the third quarter. I felt like the game was over because I don't think Kentucky had 2 drives in it. You just said it right there, but there was no point in that game where I felt like Kentucky was even capable of dropping back to pass. I think 1 pass completed for more than 7 yards all day. It was that deep ball in the first quarter to Dane Key, and that, you as dominant a defensive line performance as you can pretty much have at this level.
Yeah, let's read off a couple more of those passing stats. So Vandergriff actually got pulled in the second half. So I'll give you the 2 quarterbacks combined for 6 of 17 passing, 44 yards, 2 interceptions, including a pick 6, and an overall completion rate of 35%. Vandergriff had the higher rating of the 2 with a 35.2 QBR. I mean, completely dominant performance. Like you said, 5 sacks by South Carolina's defensive front, 11 tackles for loss by South Carolina's defensive front. Could have even been worse because they forced 4 fumbles as well. Kentucky just happened to land on all of them. Of course, South Carolina got a little lucky with the fumbles yesterday too. But I mean, that's what you like to see, right? We talked about how this could be a strength of this team. And I think even though we were pretty optimistic about the front so far through 2 weeks, it's exceeded expectations, at least as for me. I wasn't expecting Dylan Stewart to come out and have 3 sacks in his first 2 games because that's kind of a crazy thing to expect, or 3.5 actually, I think. Or I don't know, whatever. It's somewhere around there. I need to look back. But yeah, I mean, I saw a discussion on Reddit, I believe, where they were saying, is he already better than Clowney was at this point? And I'm like, there's an argument to be made. I mean, Clowney's sophomore season is when he like really had his crazy breakout and went insane. I think from a technical level, Dylan Stewart might be ahead of where Clowney was as a freshman. I think there's an argument to be made there. From a just like pure athleticism, I don't know. Not many people are going to stack up 1-to-1 with Clowney, but I do think Stewart has a higher motor. Every play he's in there, it seems like he's just wreaking havoc and really making it very hard for those tackles. Another quick note, and we'll keep talking about this. The tackles for Kentucky, the right tackle, Mincy, I believe.
Yep, Tennessee transfer.
Yeah, missed most of the first half with an injury, and then he was able to come back in the second half. And then the left tackle, can't think of his name right now, but starting left tackle went down at the end of the first half and didn't return. Not that they were particularly blocking South Carolina's defensive ends, Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart before that. But definitely, I think it ramped up from there with the injury problems.
See, that was honestly, though, another one of the thoughts I kind of had watching the game, though, and watching a little bit of the highlights back is, yes, Stewart and Kennard obviously played really well second week in a row, but Tonka Hemingway shot a gap on the first third down of the game, got Kentucky off the field there. I'm thinking of another play where TJ Sanders just pretty much busted right through. There's that second and one
Williams
where looks like they're starting to put a possession together a little bit. And then they run the jet sweep, and Jalen Kilgore flies through for like a loss of 6 or 7. Vakari Swain had a sack yesterday on a corner blitz. He didn't even barely played against Old Dominion, but he was out there in that second corner spot a little bit, rotating with Judge Collier. He flew in and got a sack. That was total team defense yesterday, at least from a pass rushing perspective. And I honestly think even just limiting it to Kennard and Stewart is kind of doing a disservice to what the other players did out there too.
Yeah, TJ Sanders also had a sack. That Vakari Swain thing I thought was interesting. I put it in our live chat, which we do during the game every week on GamecockScoop.com. But he had a receiver over him, and then the receiver motioned out and across, and Vakari Swain walked down and then immediately blitzed from there. So I'm wondering if that's something that they saw on film of like, hey, if you're uncovered, just go. And he did. That was in the first quarter, and kind of was the first major disruption for Brock Vandegrift, I think. And then I don't think he ever got comfortable from there. Vandegrift could come back and have a great career or whatever. I do think he's talented, but I think maybe we undersold the fact that this was the first SEC defense he would be facing as a starter, and he doesn't have Georgia's offensive line anymore, where he had played other SEC defenses. And yeah, I mean, we saw him be the more disrupted of the two starters here, making their first SEC start between him and Sellers.
That was a Shane Beamer point yesterday, not just defensively, but for everybody. You know, the story this week was Kentucky's got a really good defense, and they do. That D line's great, but Shane Beamer said, "All right, well, you know, we've got a pretty good defense too." The story this week was Lenore Sellers in his first SEC start. Okay, well, Shane pointed out it was Brock Vandegrift's first SEC start too. I thought we can move on to the offense in a bit, but that was everything. We talked about it all summer. The defense is just kind of going to have to carry the offense for a little bit here to start the year. And the offense still only put up 252 yards of total offense, but when you play defense that well, players say, when you know your opponent literally can't complete a pass down the field, especially when they're chasing the game, when they're the ones who are down, it's kind of easy to just tee off. You can kind of, and this is another point Shane made in that quote, they didn't really blitz that much. I don't have like a percentage on number of times they brought an extra rusher, but they were getting pressure. They were getting home with 4 most of the game, even with 3 sometimes. And that opened things up for the secondary. Of course, Nicky Memori got a pick 6 in the fourth quarter. Jalen Kilgore got an interception. Again, total 1 through 11 front to back defense dominant.
Yeah, I think that same series we were talking about earlier with the back-to-back holding calls, they ended up getting home with 3 in that same series. And you're like, at that point, what do you do? I mean, you're able to drop all 8 guys and you're still getting there with 3. Yeah, dominant defensive performance. I think some credit due to Clayton White, who, around the midpoint of last season, people were talking about him not being here next year. He made adjustments last year, and now those adjustments plus another year of development for a lot of the guys that were here, plus the addition of some key pieces like Dylan Stewart, Vicari Swain, that linebacker depth, Kyle Kennard, obviously. Yeah, I mean, it just looks like a complete unit. Obviously, you need to continue to play complementary football. I thought the offense did enough yesterday to complement the defense. The defense bailed out the offense on their 1 turnover by holding Kentucky to a field goal. The special teams, I thought, played incredible yesterday. We can talk about that a little bit too. But yeah, I mean, Shane Beamer said it yesterday. You've won 5 of the last 6, and I think the defense is the main reason for all of those. And even the one you lost to Clemson, you held them to 16 points and had a chance throughout that one. So
you also, I'm glad you brought up a transfer linebacker too, because I had it written down to give a quick shout out to Bengali Kamara. I thought one of the more underrated sequences in the game is the only drive all day Kentucky put together was the one where they ran the ball 11 straight times. Ball didn't go in the air once. That was their first of the 2 field goals, cut it to 10-3. But you go back and watch that series. It's 1st and 10 at the 23 for Kentucky. Bengali Kamara makes all 3 tackles in that series. And the first one, he trips up a running back that might have scored a touchdown if he didn't get a hand on him. Then he makes another play, gets in a gap just short of the stick on 3rd and 4. And then I thought it was telling that even after running the ball on 11 straight plays, Kentucky still didn't think it had enough juice to run the ball on 4th and 1 and kick the field goal in the red zone.
Yeah, so they actually within that sequence had run the ball at 18 straight plays at one point.
Yep.
So that tells you how much confidence they had in their passing game or their ability to protect. I was watching SEC Network last night, and they were like, do you think it was a lack of confidence in the O-line or lack of confidence in Brock Vandegrift? And the analyst, I can't remember if it was Cole Kubelik or what, but he was just like, yes.
Well, I will say, too, I mentioned they didn't go for a 4th and 1 there. They did go for a 4th and 1 the possession prior at their own, I have to play-by-play here, their own 31. First of all, Gil Bradman makes a great play on 3rd and 2 with literally a one-arm tackle to set up a 4th and 1. And then Kentucky goes for it, 4th and 1. And was it Tonka Hemingway, I think, and Boogie Huntley just got some push up front. Stop that play short. South Carolina ends up getting a field goal out of that to make it a 2-possession game.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was a big sequence. South Carolina also pulled off their own 4th down conversion. I believe it was that drive that they ended with the field goal. It was definitely close. They were pretty close together. I can't remember if they were back-to-back drives or not. But a little nifty trick play where Brady Hunt was lined up at H-back. Lenore Sellers clapped. Brady Hunt went under center. Acted like he was going to snap the ball, and that caused Kentucky to jump offside. So I thought that was a little nifty play as well. I mean, it just felt like, I guess that's a microcosm of it. Just felt like South Carolina had control of this one pretty much from the word go. I mean, I do think that there was a little bit of consternation when Lenore Sellers went to the locker room for a minute. But also, I think you got to, and maybe we use this to transition to talking about the offense. You got to give some credit to Robbie Ashford for stepping in when Lenore Sellers went down. He didn't make any mistakes. He had an 18-yard rush that set up a field goal. So you still end up with some points with your starting quarterback in the locker room. And yeah, I mean, you never trailed throughout this one. What did you see on offense yesterday? I think, the overall stat sheet isn't jaw-dropping or anything, but the output as far as points scored and like I said, the kind of complimentary way that it was played worked into your advantage yesterday.
Yeah, first of all, I'm glad you brought up Robbie Ashford because that is point blank dictionary definition why you get a guy like that in the transfer portal to back up your freshman quarterback. just a guy who's played a lot of football. Nobody's saying Robbie Ashford, Patrick Mahomes. If Lenore Sellers had a serious injury, you're having a different kind of season anyway. But guy who can step in for a quarter on the road in the SEC, calm, poised, didn't make a mistake, led a scoring drive, that field goal off the 4th and 1 stop. So that's one right there. As for the offense as a whole, I thought Lenore Sellers settled in better in this game as it kind of went on. I mean, he did nothing jaw dropping. Finished 11 for 15, 159 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. But he was hitting wide open guys, which wasn't always true last week. The first touchdown to Mazio Bennett on the second drive of the game, that's a wide open guy. I thought his best play of the game was actually not even going to show up on the stat sheet, but it's the third down backed up by the goal line where he kind of makes 2 defenders miss and hits. I think it was actually Connor Cox on the run, but a holding penalty took that one back. But you saw some of the athleticism from Sellers. You saw him getting outside the pocket a little more. You saw that kind of calm on the road, no problem. I thought the third down to Mazio Bennett on the first touchdown drive of the second half was huge. That was like 3rd and 13. Gets outside the pocket, finds Bennett wide open. A lot less design running, though, was kind of my big takeaway. It was almost like you went, you hear the term 0 to 60. It was like 60 to 0 almost on that front.
Yeah, and I wonder if that was dictated because we did find out after the game that he got banged up on the first drive. So I wonder if that's why we saw a little bit less running. I think actually, if he was healthy, I would have liked to see a little bit more just to try to open up some of the zone read stuff because South Carolina did have trouble running the ball until Rocket Sanders finally broke free for that 20-yard run and then ultimate touchdown run a few plays later. Back to Sellers, I do think that he looked a lot more poised, like you said. I thought the opening script was good from Dowell Loggins. We saw a little bit more misdirection. We saw a jet sweep from Jared Brown on the opening drive. The pass to Mazio Bennett was a broken play, but it also was a good play by Sellers, who rolled to his left, created a little more time, let that develop. The actual route tree over there was a crossing route where Vandravius Jacobs was on the outside and he crossed in, and his corner that was over him went with him and ran into the safety basically. So then that left the back left corner open for Mazio Bennett. I believe the other big play Bennett had was a busted coverage as well. So obviously the route concepts were confusing Kentucky a little bit. And we did talk about before the game that if Kentucky had a weakness, it might be their secondary. We just weren't sure how much time Lenore Sellers was going to have. And, some credit to offensive line. I do think that Kentucky front's really good. We saw the offensive line struggle with it at times, especially getting push in the run game. Lenore Sellers did see a good amount of pressure, but they held up enough to let those big plays happen. And that was the difference in this game, where Kentucky's offensive line never let anything develop the entire game.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Just held up enough. That's all you were asking for in this game. You knew Kentucky was going to make some plays. That defense is too good. Too many future NFL guys there to completely, shut them out. But Kentucky finished the game with 3 sacks, and you probably would have taken that if you got offered before the game. 12 tackles for loss, but there was some of that in garbage time too. Pretty much the entire fourth quarter was garbage time because Eamon Worry's pick 6 was the first play of the fourth quarter. But yeah, you did enough there. It's kind of that just got it out of the way sort of thing. You're not going to face many defensive fronts more talented than that all year, even with an SEC schedule. Like what I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Like Clemson's front's still pretty good.
Oklahoma was very disruptive last night. Yeah.
So yeah, I think you just got that out of the way. And you're better for it. Just like Thompson will be better for that. Kamar Bell, Torricelli Simpkins have, seen an SEC front now after coming from mid-majors. How would you grade the offense yesterday? Like I said, C- last week. I'm gonna say B- this week. Is that fair?
Yeah, I was gonna say B- or a B. I never felt, other than the first drive, I never felt that there was a ton of rhythm.
Yeah.
Maybe the Rocket Sanders touchdown drive too. That was a nice drive, but never felt like there was a ton of rhythm. But you made the big plays when they were there. I believe you had 2 third down and 10 plus conversions, or maybe 9 plus
I'm checking
conversions.
third downs now, but yeah. The third and
Um,
13 for sure to Mazio was the one that sticks out to me, but yeah.
yeah, and I thought there was like a 3rd and 9 in there as well, but
Let's
I
see.
could be wrong. Either way, both of those felt like, and maybe it wasn't a 3rd and 9, maybe it was second
Third
and
and
long or
11 was the
something.
other one to Jared
Okay,
Brown.
yeah.
That was back-to-back drives. He scored. It was the pass like down towards South Carolina's sideline. Another player so always kind of rolls outside the pocket, finds an open man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
My point there is I don't think that you can live that way every game or anything like that. But I think there is some credit due to Sellers and the receivers for getting the job done there. I think you're starting to see a couple of weapons emerge. Jared Brown, you mentioned, Mazio Bennett, Michael Smith. I thought I had a pretty good game. Josh Simon only had 1 catch, but it was a good one, touchdown catch down there. So. And I still think you can get Nick Harbor involved. Actually, maybe a moment that most people forget. South Carolina is up by 25 points already. I think it's already 31-6. And they get the ball back with about 9 or 10 minutes left. And on the first play from scrimmage, Lenore Sellers chucks one to Nick Harbor down the sideline. Almost hit him, probably would have hit him, but Nick Harbor was being held by the defender. Because it's hard to keep up with a guy that can run that fast. And you get a pass interference and get a first down right off the bat. So I like that aggression. I think Harbor's still going to have some explosive plays before the season's said and done. So anyway, I guess now that you had a relatively successful offensive performance, even if it wasn't overly good, I think you're at least starting to see who can make plays on this offense.
Yeah, and I think Nick Harbor is a good. You said you want to talk about it earlier, entry point into special teams because he had a tackle yesterday on kick coverage too. I thought that was one of the not the bigger. You didn't win the game because of kick coverage alone, but I felt like every drive Kentucky scouted inside its own 20. There was the one where Barry and Brown shook loose and got past the 30, but other than that, you held a pretty good return game under wraps. Kai Kroger punted the ball really well yesterday. I think he had 2 over 50 yards. Stuck 1 inside the 10. You kind of looked like what you thought you were going to on special teams, or what you had, most of the Pete Lembo era. That's a pretty good sign. I think Herrera hit his 1 field goal attempt too.
Yeah, and who does kickoffs? Herrera as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like you said, the punting average yesterday was 51.6 for South Carolina. Kentucky actually did all right themselves. They had a 43.3 punting average, but 51.6 is just incredible. And then maybe not a ton of people noticed this, but Herrera also placed a perfect kickoff where it bounced on the 3-yard line and like just bounced straight up in the air. And so that caused, I think it was Barry Brown to have to grab it. I think he thought it was going to just roll into the end zone. And then that set up the drive starting at the 12, which is the one that we've been talking about with all the holding penalties and stuff. And then the very next drive, sorry, my brain, Kai Kroger pinned a punt right around the 8-yard line, I think. So that was back-to-back terrible field position drives for Kentucky. And in a moment when they needed to play a little catch up, they were forced to drive the entire field. So yeah, those both stood out to me as just like, this is complimentary football, right? I think I need to look it up, but I think you probably won the average field position battle yesterday as far as where you were starting drives and stuff. If you can do that and you can play good defense, you're going to win a lot of football games.
Yeah, I'm looking at this now. Kentucky starting drives, 0-19, 0-19, 0-24, 0-44. I think that might have been the one that didn't corral Barry and Brown. 0-10, 0-31, 0-29. South Carolina 27 off the Stellars pick. But then, like I said, 0-23, 0-12, 0-8. And then it's garbage time from there. It's really just the one drive where, Brown shook loose and got past the 40. Other than that, every single Kentucky drive started inside its own 20, at least before the fourth quarter when the game was already decided.
Yeah, and I found that actual number. So South Carolina's average start was their own 36, and Kentucky's was their own 27. So that's
That's
almost
even with the starting one drive deep in South Carolina territory factored into that.
right. So probably even worse than the actual percentage lays out. So anyway, great performance by the special teams, which is something that has been pretty consistent throughout the Shane Beamer era, but we wondered if there'd be a fall off with Pete Limbo going to Buffalo. And I would say so far, not so much. You did have one error where you had a late substitution. You had to burn a timeout on it was either a punt or a field goal block, or I can't remember exactly what it was. But Beamer was pretty animated there. That was in the first half. But other than that, that's the only like flaw I can even remember on special teams yesterday.
Yeah, again, you talk about all three phases, just a complete performance. That's kind of about what I had from yesterday. Where does it go from here, I guess, is the question. We'll talk a lot more about LSU in the coming weeks, but you're 2-0. College game day is coming to Columbia next week. LSU's coming in. It's a noon kick. LSU's offense looks great right now. That defense gave up 3 touchdown drives to an FCS team yesterday. What's kind of your early thought on A, next week, and then B, what a game like yesterday could do for the season from a 30,000-foot level?
Well, we talked about it all off season. We talked about it this week. We talked about it when I gave my prediction that South Carolina was going to win. Of course, I said 20-18, and my reasoning was pretty flimsy because my reasoning was basically they have to, right? And they did. They did what they had to do. One of the easier SEC games on your schedule. And now you've at least set up an interesting week 3, and all of your goals, I suppose, are still on the table. I don't think you necessarily have to win at home against LSU, but I do think you need to at least play it pretty close, look good, keep learning the things that you need to learn ahead of Akron. We said kind of preseason they need to split these games. I think if you do win, and we can talk about what the path to that looks like a little bit, and then obviously we will throughout the week, then you're probably ranked. You beat a playoff contender from last year on a national stage in your home building, and you start the SEC schedule 2-0. You'll be the number 1 team in the SEC again next week, which they are currently right now.
Oh, yeah, we didn't even mention that. South Carolina will forever be the answer to the trivia question. Who was the first team to ever be first place, the 16-team SEC?
Palmetto Flooring Galley says, no, we should beat LSU. Yeah, we'll get into that in just a second. I actually don't totally disagree with you. I think that there's an opportunity on the table here against LSU. A couple more just like contextual things I wanted to give you, and then we can talk about LSU a little bit. You tweeted this out. So South Carolina's defense had 54 tackles for a loss as a team all of last season. Do you remember how many they have through 2 games?
I'm pulling up a tweet now because I don't, but it's 19 now.
Yeah, 19. So as you put it, if you put that pace over 12 games, it would be 114. I don't know that they're going to get.
I don't know if that's good sustain, but
yeah,
you're probably going to beat your total from last season by the halfway point of this year in that number.
I mean,
and sacks too. You had 21 all last year. You have 9 right now.
You're already nearly halfway there, right?
Yeah.
And you're 2 games in. So they're atop the SEC standings. Let's talk a little bit about LSU. LSU struggled a little with Nichols yesterday. Obviously, they lost to Southern Cal to start the season. Something we talked about this offseason and something that I still think is true is, 1, it's good that you get this game at home, and 2, it's good that you get this game so early. So LSU is replacing obviously 3 first-round NFL draft picks on offense with Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas Jr., all of whom we're probably going to see today if you're watching the NFL at all today in the opening kickoff. So I think LSU still, when you're just looking at star talent or whatever, if you were to compare the rivals rankings over the years, probably still the better team on paper, but replacing all of that, road environment and the way that South Carolina's defense has been playing, I do think it's going to be interesting, with the caveat that LSU's offensive line is probably a lot better than Kentucky's offensive line, particularly at the tackle position.
I was going to say they've got probably 2 future NFL tackles.
Yeah, so Dylan Stewart's going to get his first real test as a collegiate player next week, I think.
Yeah,
But yeah, how are you seeing this one?
I think my first kind of LSU thought that jumps out. They both because of how well Garrett Nussmeier has played through 2 games, or was it Grant? I probably should have looked that up before I started, but
I think it is Garrett.
I did have it. Okay, yeah, it is Garrett Nussmeier. I don't know why I was thinking Grant. 2 games, 8 touchdowns, 1 pick, 610 yards. But LSU really can't run the football. It's not entirely their fault. They're starting running back towards ACL in the first game of the year. They're down to 3 scholarship running backs right now. Actually, I don't know if you saw this week, but I don't know if he took a carry yesterday, but LSU's repping a safety right now at running back just because they don't have enough bodies in that room. It's kind of what South Carolina had last year. You're moving to carry on Joyner there. And even last night, you beat Nichols by 23 points. You're never in any danger of losing that game. I'm
No, but
pulling
at
up the number
halftime
now,
you
but
were
it wasn't.
only up by 2. I think it was like 23-21
Yeah.
at
You know what
halftime.
LSU's leading rusher did yesterday against a bad FCS team?
I haven't looked. I would say 50 yards.
4 carries for 19 yards.
Mm.
LSU
So
as
they
a
did.
team yesterday finished with 21 carries for 64 yards. Longest run was 12 yards. Plus a 12-yard run from Nussmeier himself. So take that out, and you're at 20 carries for 52 yards from running backs.
Did they give up
LSU is going to
sacks?
be as one-dimensional as any team you face all year. And Nussmeier is more than good enough to beat you with his arm. It's a pretty big step up from Brock Vandegrift, but I'm curious how the game plan looks, how the defensive play calling looks when you're playing a team who I don't think exaggeration say LSU can't run the football. I mean, Nichols State pretty much shut down the running game last night.
Do you still have the box score in front of you?
I do.
Can you see how many sacks they gave up?
Nichols State 0 sacks, so they did not give up a sack last night.
Okay, because I was just curious if that, how in college the rushing number factors in sacks sometimes.
Yeah,
So
no sacks there. They still couldn't run the ball.
Yeah, that's a true rushing number. So yeah, South Carolina is going to have to hold up against the run, which they did have some sections of this game where that was a little bit of a concern. But it seems like you're not going to have quite the rushing attack that you saw from Kentucky. I thought the DBs played pretty well this week. One thing we didn't mention, but I guess we mentioned his name, but Vicari Swain got a lot more playing time this past week. Jalen Kilgore gets his first interception of the season. Nick Emmanwori gets a pick six, his first touchdown as a Gamecock, which is actually, that was a little bit surprising. I mean, not that you get a ton of opportunities as a defender, but I would have thought as many games as he's already played, he might have. But yeah, so to me, the early prognosis on this one is that LSU is going to probably hit some big plays in the passing game, and that's okay. Can you be disruptive? Can you create a couple of turnovers like you have the past 2 weeks? And then on offense, and I'll have to look more into LSU's defense because this is a question I don't necessarily know the answer to. How effective can you be running the ball? Because I do think consistently you're going to need to take the air out.
Again, I didn't watch one snap of the LSU game last night, so I don't know how much this was garbage time or whatever, but Colin Guggenheim, Nichols State's running back, ran for 145 yards on 25 carries, 2 touchdowns.
Okay. Yeah.
It's an FCS running back with almost 150 yards and almost 6 yards a carry.
Yeah, and we'll also see what Lenoris's injury updates are throughout the week. I mean, I think he's going to play regardless, but is he 100%? Can he be a part of the rushing attack? Because I do think South Carolina's rushing attack is its strongest when the zone read is a true threat with the quarterback. I mean, I think we saw Robbie Ashford come in a couple times even after Sellers had come back and run the zone read as the primary runner. Maybe you do that again, although I think to some degree you're tipping your hand whenever you're bringing in Ashford to only run. But maybe you're setting up something where he pulls it and tries to hit something downfield too. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I do think you need to keep the QB run as part of your arsenal. Maybe not to the degree that it was in week 1 though.
Yeah, and like you said, I think you kind of hit it there, but just going back to LSU's defense or LSU's offense, this is the very rare game where I genuinely expect LSU to drop back and throw the ball 50 times. Like, I don't think that's an exaggeration. Can you get home on 5 of those, even 10%? Can you get 5 sacks on 50 dropbacks? That could be enough to win a football game, especially if you're forcing turnovers, if you time it well, third downs, fumbles, things like that. It's going to be a huge challenge for Stuart Kennard for those, D tackles. You're going to have to play better. I would almost even say better than this week if that's possible, just because you're facing such a step up in offensive line play. And LSU is going to be dropping back to pass probably about 80% of the time. This is what it did last night. But also, why would you doubt Stuart and Kennard at this point from what you've seen in 2 games?
Well, and I don't think that they even necessarily have to be as dominant as they've been the last 2 weeks to still make an impact. If you can cause either of those tackles to need help on occasion next week, then I do think you have some help along the interior. You have enough of a blitz scheme that you can create pressure in other ways too. I mean, we saw TJ Sanders with a sack this week. We've seen Tonka Hemingway create QB pressure before in the past. I think DeAndre Jules busted through for a tackle for loss yesterday. Debo Williams had a blitz with a tackle for loss yesterday. So yeah, I think as long as they can hold their own against those tackles and still create some problems on the outside, then I think you can pick it up on the inside. And that's the difference between this year's team and the last couple of years. I think the defensive tackles have been very strong for a while, and you didn't have that balance of the threat on the outside. And now I think it's a complete package up front.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that about covers what I had on yesterday. We'll get into LSU a lot more this week. But enjoy this one if you're a South Carolina fan, because that's about as well as you're gonna play in a road SEC game, and as much as you're gonna. I had the number, but other than 2020 at Vandy, which is an empty stadium in a COVID year against a team that didn't win a single game, that's your largest road win period since the Spurrier days, 2013 at Arkansas.
Yeah, something I want to look back into this week, and I'll post it on the Insiders Forum whenever I find it, was how that defensive performance stacked up over the last decade or whatever. I personally think just the way it looked on paper, it was not on paper, but on the screen, it was one of the most dominant defensive performances since 2013, 2012, like over a decade probably. But there might be some that I'm just like overlooking and not thinking of, but it definitely, just as uncomfortable as you made Kentucky's quarterbacks throughout the whole game, flashbacks to having like Melvin Ingram and Jadeveon Clowney rushing and creating havoc. And yeah, it'll be interesting if that'll hold up next week against LSU. At this point, I have no reason to doubt that it will, at least to some degree.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way.
All right. This has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. You can keep up with all of our coverage throughout the week on GamecockScoop.com. We'll be back here around midweek, Wednesday or Thursday, to talk South Carolina versus LSU. College game day coming for the noon kickoff. Until then, we'll see you.
Before you get out of here, you can't say Darius Rucker. Who should be the celebrity guest picker? It's probably going to be Rucker because it always is. But if you can't say him, who would you go with?
Is Steven Garcia like a big enough name on a national level to draw anything? I know within the fan base that people would like to see that, and that would be fun. And I know he and Pat DeMarco have like kicked off their little podcast or whatever, and they had Spurrier on for the first episode and stuff. So maybe there's I don't know, his name is back in the ethos enough to get him on there.
First thought it was just Spurrier himself.
Yeah,
other than Darius Rucker, who was probably going to be, like I said, but.
Has Spurrier done it? I don't think he has, because this is the first college game day since what?
Yeah, unless he's done it like in Florida or somewhere else, but
15,
not in South Carolina. So
yeah, I know it's the first college game day in like 10 years at South Carolina, so probably not. I think Rucker probably was the last one. So anyway, we will see on that, and we'll keep you posted. But until next time, we'll see you.